Dobar dan.
Good morning. We're back on the third day of our conference. When I was going to the house parties, I thought that this part of this party will be in the kitchen where all people gather there and lead different conversation that tend to be the most interesting ones. So please leave all the ambitions in front of the door to this hell. I have one technical information for all of you. On the channel 1, you will be able to listen to Serbian, English on the second channel, and Russian on the third channel. Svetlana will be speaking in Croatian, I will be speaking in Serbian, and our dear guest from Russia in Russian. This conversation was actually meant to be a bonus track in this conference, and we dealt a lot with the elections and with technical questions, but not everything can be standardized and sorted out with technical solutions. I'm happy that we had different sorts of talks about the context in which the elections are conducted. In that sense, Svetlana and Alexander are our special guest stars at this conference, and somehow I could not feel humbler and smaller in the company of these two fascinating persons. So my humbleness is at the absolute level. So please be gentle with me. Of course, the panel's name is Imagine There's No, and we have been talking about the imagination crisis. Do we live in a moment where it's difficult to imagine a better world? Perhaps we don't even have time for that. And will we be able to imagine circumstances where we'll leave this 90 war team behind us? Can we imagine Russia after Putin? So, Svetlana, you have the floor. I will try to cheer you up with the datum that in Ljubljana, once a week, whoever wants can join a spontaneous choir that sings Imagine by John Lennon somewhere in Ljubljana, holding drawn pieces of watermelon, which are the colors of Ukraine. So if you come to Ukraine, you can, Palestine, sorry, you can join us and sing Imagine. What we can rationally anticipate is not at all good. So please lock your common sense and activate your imagination. I don't have a response about Russia, first of all, because I'm not an expert in this field. And also, my relationship with Russia is watching Russian films. And second of all, is my touch with the mythology of that part of the world. But there is one segment in which I'd like to start with this conversation, and it's about Yugoslavia after 68 until the 90s, where in Yugoslavia we translated everything from Russian and especially the dissident literature. And I remember my Russian colleagues who used to come to different congresses in order to buy books that were forbidden in the Soviet Union. So the Yugoslavian relationship with the East and dissident thought, we used to translate Czechs, Hungarians, Russians. We were perfectly familiar with that production. And this is how I possess a very strange knowledge of Russian. I can read it, but I can't speaking. I can't even utter a single word. If we talk about thinking and literature, we were unable to deal with literature if we did not become familiar with the Russian written thought. The theoretical power of thinking, of basic roots, come basically from that part of the world. We have never lost the admiration to the grandeur of the Russian thought. And this might be the theoretical part of our conversation. Alexander, you do know Russia very well. Can you imagine it without Putin? I don't want to drop in the in the trap. So could you give us the reply?
Когда я был маленьким, в России
Well, when I was a child in Russia and the Soviet Union, we had popular jokes on Armenian radio. You ask the Armenian radio a question, and then they answer the question. I'll tell you a joke from 50 years ago. They asked the Armenian radio when it will get better. And the Armenian radio answered, the better times have already passed. I can imagine Russia without Putin, but I must disappoint you. Now is we're already living the third year of the war in Ukraine. Russia after Putin can be interesting, but more dangerous than the Russia that we have come to know during the last 25 years. The war is transforming Russia, first of all. Second, of course, we can also imagine that, but it's huge labor that needs to last for decades after Putin. That's labor that happened in Germany after Hitler. It's something that will demand a lot. That was also similar in Argentina for civil society to take away the consequences of dictatorship. As you know, a few years ago, Argentinian officers were judged for the terror of the Argentinian junta. And that year, it was only in 2000 that they proclaimed what the French did in Algeria was proclaimed crime against humanity. So this in Russia will demand several decades of difficult labor, uh, two-way labor, because we need to work on the memory of the Soviet past and history, not to talk about the 1970s that have passed, but 35 post-Soviet years have many dark secrets hidden in them. Are the useful voters using that knowledge to their advantage or to their disadvantage? Well, if we look in regarding that text, that the nationalism is the biggest danger for any type of revolution or any type of rebellion that the dictator has moment. My question for you, Alexander, first of all, is nationalism sometimes turns out as the border uh, between peace activists or human rights activists, to be more concrete? Are we witnesses in this moment a lack of solidarity towards the parts of Russian society which is in opposition to Putin, the war in Ukraine, and everything else? Is there some type of collective canceling, to use a common term today? I would like to hear you first, but also Svetlana as well. Well, 1984, when we had the great change happening. Up until then, the opposition was united, defending authors who had your works banned, theaters whose pieces were banned, in general, freedom of speech. The opposition was united. But in 1984, what happened was that not only was that opposition, but some from the nomenclatura also sharply responded at the attempt of the system to renew basically the punishment for verbal delict. That was the court case against Jogo, and suddenly we saw people in courts who appeared in this public, some new people, and even the nomenclatura reacted. They were basically against that. That was a huge change. And initially, I must admit, I was very happy. And I looked with much sympathy this increase of the masses. However, very quickly, that larger group simply divided itself and permitted a minority to work on itself. It was a group that did not put too much importance to human rights, and they put collective or rather national ethnic rights before human rights. So those are simply nationalists who opened a door that was being dug for long by dissidents. They entered through that door and took their positions. And that dissidence really briefly functioned because already next year, 1985, those same people were writing about the endangered Serbs, about the attacks of others against Serbs. They were also proposing a logic: do to them what you believe they will do to us, but do it preemptively, and so on and so forth. So dissidents, the non-nationalists, was reduced to a very small handful of people. And only then, when we saw the war starting, we saw change in the battle order. But a huge number of dissidents basically just decided to be servants of the new regime. And that perspective talks to us about what can happen here in Russia as well. Alexander? In Russia, we do not have any type of experience of such thing. Regarding nationalism and imperialism, I can recall the words of Comrade Stalin, who said around 1937, under the right angle, communists are left and right. Actually, the governing positions are no worse than governing positions. People that I have communicated with, that I have had friends as, including Ukrainian nationalists and also Armenian nationalists. I know also Russian nationalists who were good people back in the old days. And when I mention Russian nationalists, I would have to admit that since the beginning of the war in the Ukraine, there has been a division amongst the Ukrainian nationalists. They did not support Putin's aggression. Those warring in Ukraine against the Russian war, they declared themselves as Ukrainian nationalists. Nationalists cannot be hidden. They exist de facto. That is clear. And if they use the words of language or language of words, there's also a language of terror, which is latently present there. Russian pacifists, some 15 years ago, were very present in Russia. And I believe that we can see a formation of a very civilized Russian society, and the Russian regime of Putin, which gathers nationalists. And there has been a hunt begun against them, and they're very united. So any topic, it becomes complex, and it is filled or saturated with technical phrases. And in order to interpret that complexity, you have demagogical narratives on every single topic. And when we discuss elections, complex topics are transformed into platitudes.
Это серьезно?
We have a lot of topics, but do we have the election? It's a rhetorical question. We all gathered here around that topic, but it should not be the rhetorical question as we're gathered here to consider this topic. What can improve the election? It's a process that actually allows us to elect the best people into the parliament. This is just like a classical theatre. This is the method used in order to gather what's better and not what's worse. But I have to disappoint you. The economist Kerik, who won the Nobel Prize in 2001, got it exactly for the study of the market, where we actually established a degrading order in the market. There are no more experts on the market. Why? What's the consequence? It's easier to sell what's worse than what's better. We have people who explain to buyers or to voters what to opt for, and therefore they elect what's worse and not what's better. So we have second-hand cars, and then we have second-hand people at the head of the state. The information about people are not assessed by the quality, but by the number of likes. And we have the same situation, be it elections or other things. The voters will elect as they should do. They obey. But why the voter should do so? Without expert, without critics. We can't do that. For instance, if you have a restaurant, if you have fine dining on the one side and on the other McDonald's, what will you do? If you have Michelin stars restaurants on the one hand and some other type of restaurants on the other, people will elect what they prefer. If you do not have experts, if you do not have levels of quality, we will become insufficiently informed about the choice. This is why people elect Trump or Putin. So the story is not about the quality, the story is about the information. People were allegedly given the right to elect, but essentially people are deprived of the possibility to make informed decisions. Exterior characteristics of the election exist, but in reality, the choice does not exist. I don't want to suggest to all of you to escape because nothing can be done. But Homer Simpson, the great American philosopher, said that an attempt is the first step towards the defeat. But what can we do with that? What can we do if we take into account our huge historical experience? If we talk about the American elections that will take place quite soon, I wonder if the lady from Svetlana's country will come back to the White House. Bill Clinton is attributed with the quote, Democrats want to fall in love, Republicans just fall in line. This was the quote from the 90s, and they say that nowadays we have a different situation. But if we go back to the main topic, imagine, are we in the situation that we can't fall in love now because there's no one to be in love with? Everything is a pattern, everything is a calculated activity that produces the Eastern vision and that creates different people. Are we now in the crisis of inspiration? Would it be different if there were someone who might animate us, juggle us? But we should not undermine the importance of charisma. Let's just see the latest example. But before that, I have to say that falling in love is the easiest thing. It's not a problem. Look what happened to Magyar, the Hungarian candidate. He gathered the party in a very brief period of time and got 30% of votes. Why? Because lots of people fell in love with him. So Alexander said something very important. We are saturated. We are completely fed up with the elections. We constantly have to make choices. Waiters constantly ask us what we want. We are overburdened by social media and we lost the capability to measure what to elect. We lost all sorts of criteria. We have to make up the reasons why we vote for someone. And then we have the capillary spread of political will through fear, threats, and the like. Will I buy the shampoo with light blue or dark pink label? So this consumer element is vital, and this is why I underpin it. What does the transition look like? What will happen next? I went to Greece when I was 26 and I had a scholarship, and I came there at the time when the dictatorship was defeated. I went to the archaeological museum and I was stuck there. I saw everything. I nearly died. So, first of all, I witnessed the tyranny, the fall of the tyranny. Then I witnessed the intermediary power, the intermediary government. And when all of that calmed down, when this 9-month party ended, I was able to see people who had escaped from Greece coming back to Greece. I witnessed the solemn getting out of prisons of people who had been imprisoned. And now we had the conservative power, which was acceptable to all. But sometimes what's acceptable for all is the most dangerous. We had criminals who were not tracked down. We had criminals who were not tried, who were not imprisoned. We had that period of horror. And after 7 years of transitions, we got Papandreou, who was elected in the elections when everyone was sad about everything. And we had a 10-year golden era. When it ended, Papandreou did not have anything to say anymore, and then actually borrowed the nationalist discourse from Serbia. Serbian influence on Greece was never analyzed, but I remember him weeping in front of cameras. Why? Because Milosevic went to Athens and did not pay a visit to Papandreou. So I do recognize that the transition can be an immense challenge for everyone. What kept Greece alive was that flourishing of culture that lasted 10 years. Culture is what bears the burden of transition and not the consumer society. This is something we have not talked about, although I think it's a crucial topic. And I don't talk there only about orchestra that will perform wonderful melodies. I'm talking about culture that has its voice and that puts people in an environment of a constant feast of democracy. In Slovenia, on Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays, we had a lot of party, a lot of fun in the street. We had humor, sarcasm, irony, some different way of behaving for all generations, for the young, for the elderly. And this is why I think that the culture should play a crucial role. So please be prepared to sing, to wear masks, be prepared to dance in the streets, whatever your age is. Prepare to jump into the Sava River, just like we did in the Ljubljanica River, although it's equally dirty. So, this is the mood that will save you in the moments of depression. Shit.
Alexander, who could you perhaps fall in love? So, who could you potentially fall in love with, Alexander? To to fall in love, to fool myself, it would have been possible. It happened actually in the late 1980s and also participated in our democratic movement without noticing then and there its dark side, which I now already understand a lot of it. That was some Pulp Fiction. I only saw part of that content, but I have no regrets and regarding that period because at that time you could have strived to save people to end and to prevent crime, that possibility existed. Later on, with the arrival of that face, immemorable face, he caused the war, but he did not permit any room, and he kept gradually clenching the fist without leaving any place for breathing room for those opposing it to do anything. And a very important task for me today is to understand, to comprehend, and to analyze and to present to those who are important what we 30, 35 years ago, what mistakes we made 35 years ago in order to prevent such mistakes again. However, that is completely stupid. Now to yell, it's completely stupid to yell and say, no, my entire life was a mistake. I'm not talking about myself, but about a huge number of people who attempted then to to reach freedom. You've all seen the uh, the Flight Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Milos Forman, the gentleman played by Mr. Jack Nicholson said, at least I tried. We had that. At least we tried that. And you cannot take that away. The most important is that people can learn from our mistakes. The Russian liberation movement now has about 200 years of tradition, and our predecessors who also tried to do something, they made mistakes and they were young. And for the current youth, which is now facing the same choices now, again, have to understand that they are not the first inhabitants of the earth, that somebody has already asked those same questions to themselves. And this new young generation should not repeat some already committed mistakes, but to make their new mistakes. And this is a feeling that we are missing. History must be known, whether it be the history of an unsuccessful liberation movement, because currently in Russia, Putin must know that that knowledge creates a system of coordinates. And if we remember something from the past, it is not because we have veterans speaking to children, oh, I was a hero. No, actually, I was a fool. But perhaps you will not be smart, but you have a possibility of creating different idiocies or stupidities. And what's missing from my previous speech, life is no longer school because the children are ready to learn everything by themselves. The world needs to become once again a school. That wouldn't be a bad thing. As you said, the Svetlana culture is perhaps the only chance. But then when we start contemplating what kind of pressure we have, what we call culture and cultural production in a wider sense, then man becomes pessimistic. We're currently in a situation that we're waiting for that Expo 2027. And up until then, I don't think a single independent or official cultural institution will remain until then, because culture has been given a different name, a different content. Now it's called creative industry. And when it's an industry, it's different. Uh, which is worse, that pressure of capital or pressure of politics, which seems to me has completely transferred and has begun a hunt to kill off what needs to be killed off. Well,
The European community has dirty hands there, not just the capital. The European community, um, in 2000, I was actually in Bologna when its program was made, and I remember that MPs with great joy adopted the following conclusion: to establish an educational system in which every European citizens would be able to have a PhD without any expense. So now remember what's left out of this program. The European community does not do enough on education and culture, which is lamentable. Instead of introducing an educational system that would mix the useful, the old, the new, that would be open to all sorts of innovations, and meanwhile nurturing what's crucial for Europe, which is understanding and knowledge, which had before turned out to be a good thing, it now supposes strict grammatical rules. I insist on grammar, then logics and rhetorics, and the fourth, the style. This is the formula that helped Europe since the 18th century. Now we need a French encyclopedia. We need intelligent people that will explain the notions and subjects. Otherwise, we will be lost in the flosculus. I have to use a Latin word. It's a masculine word. And this is what has entered the public discourse. I remember a film, and this was Scherber's Umbrellas. I don't know if anyone here remembers that film. So everything is sung. Even the words like, good morning, may I have a cup of coffee? And if I say I'm in love, it means that I was able to find men, a flosculus, I'm still using the Latin word. When I was a counter candidate to Yanis Yansha, I said, wow, what a background. I will vote for this man. So we do talk about love by repeating the narrative, the discourse from Turkish series, what we overheard. In that sense, I'm certain and I'm deeply convinced that a good reform of a school system or a good teachers' trade union should work at another level, should insist that students ask questions, that they should interrupt the teacher in order to ask a question. This is the change that should emanate from the European community. This change in the way of thinking should be brought, should be crucial for understanding politics and making choices. Alexander, as you know, we have a big Russian diaspora here in Belgrade, and what I find fascinating and surprising is the cultural life that this community has here. They live here and they do not permeate through their mother scene. Some events are way more costly than the Serbian production. The Russian population understands the value better. When we think about Russia, we think of it as a state of great culture. the dissident one or a different one. This is also what Svetlana mentioned. Perhaps we are biased, but we imagine the Russian educational system to be fantastic. Students enrolled in the Russian school are quickly transferred to the French system because it's easier. Can we talk about despotism? What do you say? First of all, I don't know anything about the Russian population in Serbia. I've encountered only one family, and the head of that family works in the Russian school. They are language scientists who chose Serbia on purpose. They did not flee the war. They came here to work. The Russian history cannot be taught in Russia in the same way. I know people who have worked here for 3 decades, but they do not go to these expensive events that you've mentioned. So I know nothing about the way Russians live here in Serbia. I know that we possess knowledge. I know that we are very cultural, cultivated people. And despite of all that, we elected Putin. There's another film about that, Rings of Power. And we have the story about this lord who spread the evil all across the country. Whatever happened in Russia started at the slow pace and started in the 90s. And even before that, a few days ago, on the 22nd or 23rd October, I talked about the events that occurred in the 90s when all of a sudden our Russian Democrats decided to address the traditional electorate, and instead of talking about ideals and freedoms, they talked about how it had been great before that, only in order to gather votes. But this turned out to be a strategic mistake. At the time, they did not opt for lustration in a open or a hidden form. The result of all that was Putin, who directly participated in political repressions as a participant of secret services. Perhaps he was in Germany as a tourist, but basically he chased dissidents in Leningrad. There were other mistakes too. There were things that had not been completed. If we go back and think about Tolkien, you do remember when Sauron had the chopped finger with the ring And this is actually the personification of what happened in 92 and 93. They did not dismantle the security services, but were later used and abused. The ring was used by those who decided to put it on their ring finger. So this is the question. This is the issue of tactical solutions, of dirty tactical moves, a dirty tactical compromise that brought Putin to power. The habit, the compromises also brought Putin in power and contributed to his spreading everywhere. We have the word appropriation. This is the word used when talking about ethnical cultures after 1991. We had the appropriation when all the dissident texts were published in magazines of editors who led fine lives during the period of Soviet Union. Those who were incarcerated did not star in the channels, were actually betrayed. And this is the culture that was later multiplied. They were not spread this dissident resistance. They, in 2012 or 2011, understood that the elections had been falsified, but it did not reflect to the previous 10-year governing of Putin. It was difficult to admit that Putin had been bad. In Russia, we do not have the culture of assuming accountability. We have that in Dostoevsky's novels, but not in our actual lives. We do not accept our own mistakes, and therefore we cannot rectify them. If we talk about the educational system, I have given a long list containing a number of points, and each of them could suffice to say that it's not the enemy who brought us Putin, but the internal defect in our system. So I can just repeat that our society does not accept and does not acknowledge mistakes. If you do not reflect upon it, we will have Putin in the future.
Well, we have a lot of experience here with manipulations and issues of responsibility and also trying to muddy the waters. What is responsibility? What is culpability? Society can have obligations. Individual can be culpable, but that's manipulated quite a lot. And in this ever smaller political life of ours, as soon as we see a new individual, the first question the mainstream media asks them, what do you think of Srebrenica? Was that genocide or not? As if that's a question, do I prefer chocolate or vanilla ice cream? I think the thing is completely a thing of subjective perception, and we have that very long uh, litany where if they don't say it was clearly genocide, and then it's rejected. So they keep saying something in between, something neutral and undefined. And recently we had this young wannabe leader, so to speak, and he answered to a question: Why are we even being asked about Srebrenica and all that? I have a generation that uses modern technologies. I mean, I also use modern technologies. He said, I'm a generation that uses modern technologies. We travel, we have friends of all nationalities and religions. We have nothing to do with that. I'm interested by that. We don't have anything with that. What type of manipulation is that of memory, of historical memory? Is that the reason why the younger generations are much more conservative than previous generations? That was also established in a survey in Slovenia that the young were closer to the right wing and conservatism than the left and progressive ideologies, or to social, they're completely socially, I would say, uh, inept or unsensitive. I would link also the diaspora. The diaspora is not a place which will originate for changes. The Russian diaspora following the October Revolution did not contribute to any of the changes, reforms in the Soviet Union, but it functioned. And here in Serbia, it functioned certainly positive. It was the entire revolution of ballet, of linguistics. We had structuralism introduced. We know little about this. Byzantinology became a science, and so on and so forth. So some things happened in Serbia, thanks in part to immigrants from Russia. If that will be happening today, we'll see Serbian and Yugoslav diaspora, the young, are key for breaking up historical revisionism. So those are people attending foreign universities who are capable and free to research history and to give new ideas and to criticize revisionism in the post-Yugoslav countries. That is a very important element, but an even more important element than all of that is how to bring down a dictatorship from the inside. We keep discussing about that. I'll give another example, a very interesting example from Greece. The colonels, the colonels in Greece, they were basically rural people from the village side. They were very vulgar. They brought about that in the first year or two, all the intelligentsia, including technical intelligentsia. So the technical individuals left TV, so the TV became completely amateurish. So everything that was capable, everyone who was capable left Greece, all the professionals, all the elite, everyone. And in the meantime, the colonels came to the idea that basically for all those who could never get to university, they enabled the rural population with scholarships, and the rural youth came to university. That never happened before. Greece was a true capitalist, ruthlessly capitalist country, ruthless towards the poor. They came to university, they read some books, and they started organizing the revolution and the rebelling against the colonels. So in other words, the colonels financed their own demise by financing education. That was one of the manners in which we can permit it. So let the locals, the poorest, the least privileged, let's be aware of that, for them to do something by themselves. And that's always the best way. Regarding culture, I'll go back to the power of culture despite all. And we have to face with the fact, do we today have national cinematography anywhere? No. We only have Yugoslav cinematography. There is not a single film ex-Yugoslavia which can be financed from national funds or national budget or some garbage that the national industry produces. But in principle, there is no film, which is not a cooperation of pretty much all ex-Yugoslav republics, and of course, funds from the EU. We can't do anything without it. But today, we still have Yugoslav cinematography as opposed to Republican Zastava, A, B film, and so on. Today, now we have Yugoslav cinematography and free market, which is organized along the principles of capitalist logic. We try to find funds where we can get them, but at the same time, you find talents at the same area who work according to their own preferences, their loves, their ideas, and those ideas are much far from nation states. And when we consider the diaspora, we need to also consider another unusually important element: Russian diaspora, not just industrials and media specialists and all those who were counseled directly to go to Serbia because it would be best to survive there. The European Union counseled them to do so, and all other consequences, let's not forget. And that corpus, there's a lot of people who fled because they were LGBT, simply because human rights no longer permit them to live in Russia. The banning of human rights no longer permit them to stay in Russia. So we have completely new social category which we need to get acquainted with, we need to link up with, and maybe that is precisely what can enable some modifications and changes in the diaspora. Instead of looking rich Russians uh, uh, destroying the apartment market in Belgrade, driving the most expensive cars and using the most expensive apartments.
Молю.
We are about to spill over the coffee break, so our part of conscious lives were spent under circumstances where we had no choice, at least not these multi-party that we know. Did we expect this? Was it a small win when we had these first elections? Or perhaps we didn't win? Where are we on this path to democracy? Of course, what was back then, 30 or 35 years ago, was actually a win. What the elections that were held originally in the Soviet Union, the elections of one man among one single man, became all of a sudden meaningful. And a lot of dignified people were elected. However, in the Baltic countries, they managed to conduct some elections. Some nationalities had Lukashenko and some others did not have anything. It all depended on the previous years. One of the best elections we had at the time was the Crimean people's choice. They went to Asia and were able to establish the Congress out of diaspora, and they elected the parliament. It actually represented that group, that ethnicity, and that was the only case where ethnical representation had actual people that were not self-proclaimed. The Crimean Tatars went back to Crimea. They were later arrested, incarcerated, and chased away from the Crimea. People committed suicides, and there are charismatic leaders like Mustafa Jamiliev. This appeared to be a senseless resistance, but however, he gave the possibility of the choice because actually there was a choice. We had people renowned for their work, for their activities. If we talk about Ukraine, there are also people who can be recognized. Mustafa Jamilian was actually, yes, and it's not a Ukrainian name, but we had another Mustafa coming from Afghanistan and whose family, after the Soviet aggression, fled Afghanistan and organized Maidan. Now he's a Ukrainian patriot. His brother went to wage the war. It's really difficult to find bigger Ukrainian patriots. The experience of this resistance of that time, when seemingly it was unable to acquire freedom. This is why it's important to see that things are changing, things are developing. Lithuanians left the Soviet Union softly, without any violence. Why? Because they had a strong resistance in 45 and 44, and also a soft resistance afterwards. If we talk about the events in later, if we talk about Orwell's book, 1984, there are no Lithuanians, but a few years later, everything changed and we had a win. Now we're considering different movements, different activities, and we can say that even hopeless moments can prepare us for moments when we will have an option, we will have a possibility. We often talk about the elections as a sprint race, and actually, it's a marathon. And this marathon allows changes. And this marathon shows us how important culture and education are, because only thanks to culture and education we actually can have a choice. Yes, I agree with you. Culture and educations are at the 41st kilometers. They're really hard to reach. There are two more things that I'd like to warn you about: what we lived, what we experienced, beside the fight against revisionism, should be the things that need to be interpreted today. In Slovenia, we have a movement against abortion. But a key issue, a key question that was not asked to these people who protest against abortion: why didn't you react against abortion during socialism? What prevented you back then? Why didn't you say that you were against it? Why are you reacting now? Now you are retired, you're old. There is one element that I do not emphasize willingly, but it is vital if you want to understand politics. The right wing is stupid and undereducated. This is the main characteristic, and it's very hard to fight stupidity. this is a strategic message. It's difficult to fight the stupid ones. What can you do with them? Just invite them for a cup of coffee. There is a political power that can change the world, I would boldly say. And these are women. Women know a lot about abortion. They know a lot about animal protection. They know a lot about the children upbringing. They know a lot about feeding and children, about children's well-being. They have lived at least for 10 centuries in a patriarchal world. We have a lot that this world taught us about. We steal techniques from this period in order to achieve whatever is possible. We have to acquire not only voters, but also people who will understand one another, at least in some situations. You can see women in different movements. There are many initiatives where women are dominant. You have to understand what they can do. We have to count on women because women are able to talk with absolutely everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this discussion. Thank you also for being present at this conference in general. And thank you very much for your attention. See you some other time.
Dobar dan, samo obaveštenje da drugi panel oblikovanje
Shaping up the future roadmap to the election integrity will start at 11:30. Enjoy your coffee meanwhile.
Jel možda, mislim,
I don't know. So finally, Pavle finally got a microphone, and you as well. This conference could not go past without us saying something. We have actually the most difficult role. Luckily, we have a great team of researchers, journalists who helped us during these 3 days of discussions to try and to find motivation, to find hope. Starting with the first panel where the interlocutors chose fear as the emotion or the feeling that they felt. Some chose hope, and we tried to find hope, and I believe we found it. But I leave that for the end of this closing session. The very beginning, esteemed colleague Tsarnyansky said what the goal of this conference was. The goal of the conference was basically to reconsolidate ourselves, to learn from others, from other people's experiences from other countries. And I believe that we succeeded in a relatively short period, starting as broken individuals. I must say that this conference was prepared by a rump CRTA team after several difficult months of elections in Serbia. And I believe from Ms. Slapshak, basically a holiday of democracy that needs to be seen. We've seen everything except a holiday feeling, neither before nor after the elections, at least not for those who see the holiday in the rule of law and institutions which work in the public interest without compromise. We saw the ugly face of the elections and a team which managed to at least a portion of the citizens of Serbia who can hear our messages transfer what we saw in the field, what we saw in the electoral administrations in the central local level, in the polling stations, which image the media is transfer onto the citizens of Serbia, which choices the citizens of Serbia have, which choices the citizens get before every single electoral race, which from the outside seem like elections, but when you look at it in details, you see its ugly face. So I would say that the very findings of the observatory mission of CRTA following the December elections and partially the June elections of this year uh, painted three fields that need to be improved. The first is the media scene, the possibility for citizens to be informed, to hear different ideas. It was said and underlined during these 3 days that elections are competitions of ideas, to hear different ideas. And according to their own conscience, based on facts, decide and judge whom they will lend their confidence for a limited time. The citizens of Serbia do not have that right. The public service as the focal point of information in every society does not exist. In Serbia, we heard that during yesterday's discussions. Another very problematic and difficult field and domain is regarding pressure, blackmail of citizens of Republic of Serbia across its territory. We've had that privilege of understanding during yesterday's panel discussion. I'm also quite disoriented in terms of time. It might have been also before yesterday, the panel regarding clientelism, where clientelism has practically eaten out the very essence of elections. And it's also quite defeating that we could not reach a solution how to struggle with that true and serious deviation. And a third issue, perhaps should be in the first place, is the unaccountability or lack of punishment. There was not a single topic which we were discussing where we did not conclude that we're missing people who have integrity in the institutions, who can practically do what they were schooled to do. One of the reasons was that because people in those positions were not there who have proper educational background because of clientelistic corruptive actions, but we have institutions that work in very small private party interests instead of the public interest. Today with me, I have Pavle Dimitrievich, one of the key individuals in the observatory mission of CRTA, who's faced every single day many challenges and has great a lot of work with the institutions, has a lot of, and also trying to resolve the problems in institutions. This is in his hands, and Pavle will discuss the conclusions and some findings and also some guidelines where to go next regarding the impunity and also regarding the integrity, which are the preconditions for the integrity of of a system, and also Ivana Stevanovic, who has also a very difficult task that we've been discussing for years. Unfortunately, we cannot see a clear method how to resolve the issue of a lack of pluralism, the unprofessionalism in the media. And then I would ask, first of all, to start from you, Ivana. What are the indications? Where can we find indications of solutions when we discuss media, media regulation, when we talk about practices of constant manipulation of the public, especially from those focal points which need to be sources of facts and not manipulations?
Na početku
Well, first of all, I have to congratulate CRTA, not only for a fantastic organization of this conference, but also for a very important fact that you managed to bring here people from the institution who were willing to speak to us. The working group I moderated yesterday hosted for the first time after many, many years one high ranking person from the REM, the Regulatory Authority of Electronic Media. That alone was a significant fact. Of course, that presence resulted in the working group we had, which is my strongest impression from yesterday. We accumulated so many frustration during all these years that yesterday we had a discussion that was the sort of a spillover of the frustration onto one person coming from an institution. We concluded the yesterday's working group with a recommendation. Whenever you read a recommendation, you think, oh dear God, what kind of recommendation is this? But the conclusion is that we have to talk and that we need to have a series of such talks so that we can express all our frustrations. This is the only precondition so that we might have on a sixth or a seventh event of that kind, think of solutions with representatives of the institution. So this is how we closed yesterday's session about the regulatory authority. We said that through discussion, it was needed to sort out political traumas from the past to come to a sort of catharsis so that we could pursue the discussions. We talked insufficiently, though, about the new paradigm that appeared in the EU with the adoption of the new media laws. These laws give more importance to the regulators and oblige them to offer a platform for a broader social dialogue. And this is what the dialogue, through some sort of implementation, might be done also by our regulator. Obviously, the trust in the possibility of transforming the public broadcaster and the regulator is at a very low level. We concluded that we needed a reset of those two bodies, and actually these institutions, in our opinion, should be built from scratch. We talked a lot about technical things like deadlines that a regulator has for taking actions or for pronouncing measures or for publishing reports. Nevertheless, we concluded that these short deadlines do not hinder the REM to perform its duties. And actually, the REM fails to perform them because it simply doesn't want to do that. Of course, we had the elephant in the room. We talked about the fact that in 10 days we won't be having any more the Council of the REM. The new council has not been elected, and yesterday we saw from the representative his interpretation. In his opinion, after November the 4th, the council won't exist anymore. However, he was not completely certain about it. Obviously, they don't even know. The present representatives of the opposition will initiate a session in order to publish the competition for the new composition. The other side apparently is deeply already working on it. There was a complete confusion with all the competent institutions if we talk about the REM. The only two statements about the council that we have come from the two opposing statements. One is from the Minister of Information, who said that decision of the Constitutional Court is pending, and the other one is from Tanja Miščević, who said that two media laws that have been recently adopted have to be modified and amended, and that the new council will be elected by the end of the year. We will see what happens. When it comes to the public media broadcasters, I have to look at my notes. It was established that there was imbalance in political powers that permeates through all the discussions regarding the media. It was established that the balance does not mean you spoke for 5 minutes, you spoke for another 5, and then you spoke for 5 more minutes. It's about the contents, not only critics, but also alternative ideas and suggestions should be heard. a large space was dedicated to education and culture, the capacities of journalists due to the third decades of devastation are at a very low level, and I don't think this is by chance. What we have as a situation here is that journalists have less and less knowledge, that are less and less capable of producing high quality contents, and in that way it is necessary to seriously educate young journalists, because if I may say, I think that in this country we have the editorial crisis. We do not have editor-in-chief that are capable, patient, and knowledgeable enough to work with young journalists and to introduce them to this art and crafts, if I may say so. It is necessary that the RTS establishes the editorial integrity, but I don't think we've reached the answer how to do that. And here I have two recommendations from the CERTA's expert working group, namely, I will spontaneously say that this should be actually written as the conclusion of the conference. Shall I wait or shall I say it right now? Okay, so the working group should provide expert support in order to draft strategies and tactics of impartial reporting by public broadcaster. This group should educate the employees, providing them necessary trainings and performing evaluation. I think these recommendations are great. And I will spontaneously give one recommendation of my own, i.e., of the Slavko Surovia Foundation. If we talk about the REM, it's vital to introduce mechanism that will make the REM accountable for their actions. As of now, the REM is not accountable to anyone for its duty. The official proponent should have the status of a party in the complaint. The entire coalition for the freedom of media, including CERTA, stood behind that recommendations. However, at the last minute, the government failed to introduce this recommendation as a bill, as a motion. So, if we talk about the efficiency of the regulator's work, there should be an institution overseeing the work of that institution. So, that's it from me.
Thank you, Ivana. Institutions. Yesterday and the day before, heard a lot of strong messages regarding the analysis whether Serbia is a democracy or not. Is this a hybrid regime? Is this an autocracy? One of the strongest messages was that things are quite black and white. They can't be hybrid. So how can we as actors trying to defend democracy, free and fair elections, can we work in such an environment, in an environment where the normalization of breaking the law is actually quite valuable and has found its way into every segment of society, where the answer to each problem is not found in the rules of the system. If you have any type of health problem or a communal problem, you won't be calling a health center, call center, or institutions. You'll basically go through your phone book to see who you know in those institutions who could finish or have complete something for you through personal contact, something that would be completely normal action. So we have a very big gap between institutions and citizens. The institutions are not there for the citizens, but the institutions are there for the citizens to serve them. In an environment where we have a huge lack of confidence, surveys that we can call upon or refer to a great lack of confidence of citizens in the electoral registry, voter registry, and the incapacity of the country to update the voter registry. And we're also witnesses that in every single institutions we have some champions, pioneers. These are individuals who have kept their honor and in a completely normal way are working hard at their job with integrity. Some of them were present during these days of discussions. So the impression is when we tried yesterday to do a summary of the conclusions that we have yet to reach bottom. And if I were to read everything I wanted to say about my impressions, I could remember the comment of Baitsveta, her panel, but everything that I've pronounced seems so dark. What will we do next? So that those dark feelings, I get them whenever you need to start talking, Pavle, of where we should go next with the prosecutor's office and all the other institutions. First of all, keeping in mind the novelty from December to 2023, when we started using, and we no longer call this a changing the term of a captured state with the criminal state, because we're witnesses that some civil servants in higher positions were directly breaking the law and rules of the service in order to create political gain for one group without truly any type of consequence. The consequences were even the other way around. These people actually could advance a few months later in their careers and in their service once the public forgot the role. And this conference should be a beginning in the discussion, not to discuss elections, but a few weeks before 2027, if we'll see elections after a successful expo, to try to regain forces. Probably you have the most energy, you lost the most weight in Sirte, you have a lot of momentum. How did you see these days, and what were the key conclusions for very serious panels? We had the representatives of the prosecutor's office, which was a very positive surprise for me. One of the impressions that you transferred upon us, if I may say so, we no longer have Chatham House rules. They were actually quite basically felt ashamed what they heard from their colleagues in Bosnia, Herzegovina, and North Macedonia, what was being done by their colleagues in order to make elections somewhat better in their societies. Go ahead, Pavli, the floor is yours. So, speaking from the dark after this sort of introduction, one of the key conclusions that could open direction into we can how can we even lobby for some changes that we want. We cannot have halfway solutions which are only partial. The system where we are, these institutions are in such a position that any type of partial solution will not create any type of change. To the contrary, it will only continue the agony. We won't be having a better voter registry if we just check names and surnames and the addresses in the voter registry. We won't have a better electoral administration if we attach their responsibility to educate the members of the electoral bodies. We won't win against impunity in the electoral process if we simply increase the sanctions and criminal acts relating to elections. So those individual solutions in this context of ours mean absolutely nothing. What we do actually need are fundamental restructuring of every portion, every part of institutions that relate to elections. We spoke here these days about the electoral administration, about the role and the work of the prosecutor's office, about manners and methods how to attain a better and higher quality of voter registry, how to do an independent audit of the voter registry. And we have some 4 or 5 keywords: integrity, knowledge, capacity, independence. All are at the same level of priority. And our common task and these 3 days and in the future is to imagine solutions how to have these 5 key fundamental key words in the institutions, because these 5 issues are not present in the institutions. Someone might have simply capacity or nothing else. Someone might have knowledge but nothing of the other elements. So we have to have all 4 elements in one place. Another phenomenon which we were faced with was that in this country, regarding important issues, we least consult those who know the most about them. And I believe that this conference has tried and succeeded to exit that impasse and to set up a new standard regarding the audit of the voter registry, the reform of the electoral administration. We had people talking who were experts in that field, which unfortunately in some other processes happening formally is not the case. Decisions are made on processes we're discussing by people who have nothing to do with that. And when we discuss the recommendations themselves, I believe that it is very important to start from impunity, or rather the role of the prosecutor's office. We cannot speak of discontinuation with impunity if we do not have, on the one hand, the integrity of the prosecutors, and on the other hand, the mechanisms to react. So we have to have a person, and a tool which that person will work with. People, they're still rare, although they do exist, are without tools and instruments. And what we actually mentioned then, where recommendations are directed the most, how to give prosecutors more possibilities to react and to implement all actions that are needed in due time in order for the system to prosecute the wrongdoers in the electoral system. So we talked about the general obligatory instructions for the actions of prosecutors in the electoral process, the obligation for special investigative actions for criminal acts regarding elections to be prescribed by the law on criminal procedure. We also talked about the necessary coordination between the police, the prosecutor's office, and electoral bodies, which is non-existent, absolutely non-existent these days. And during these days and these discussions, we could hear that our institutions like to basically abstain from their responsibilities. They just say, I'm just standing by what's written on the paper. I won't ask anyone. I won't be communicating with anyone unless if you address me directly. We heard that in other countries, whenever somebody changed something, it wasn't exactly as easy as that. There was some sort of turning point. It's very important for that coordination to truly exist, not only regarding me sending an official email to someone, but to have an exchange of information. And based on all of that, then a speedy reaction of the prosecutors. We also heard that one of the recommendations was to limit the time period during which prosecutors should take a decision to initiate an accusation, active accusation or not. And when we talk about the voter registry, one topic which you can never know enough about. I believe that this conference also helped us a lot to learn how to actually get to an independent and efficient audit of the voter registry, but we also learned that audit is only a path. Everything we've heard in all other places and institutions wasn't completely true. The audit of the voter registry, some try to represent it as one single event that happens once and then that's the end of the process. However, through these discussions, we had an opportunity to hear that the audit is just the beginning of the path leading to establishing a system of regular audit, which regularly audits the voter registry. So we're establishing here a system which later on should continue functioning. As such, the voter registry audit is not a goal in itself and absolutely means nothing if you do not, during that first audit, secure access to all databases, all state bodies which have any type of relation to the voter registry. And that audit must be implemented by an independent commission where we will not have any type of political influence, domination, any type of political influence or any type of political party dominance. And I'd also say a little bit about the electoral administration. If we expect, and I truly believe that we do expect from the electoral administration to tackle all of these problems in the electoral process, such as the abuses during candidacy, falsifying different signatures, lists which are not minority lists but formally are defined as such, and so on and so forth, then we definitely need to have a professional electoral administration with very clear jurisdictions and competencies which are beyond the electoral process. Only then can we have an efficient tackling of these problems and in the end to be an adequate partner to other institutions such as the prosecutor's office in processing and detecting the criminal acts and the criminals which we were discussing. So it is insufficient to simply increase their competencies. We need to have a reform of the method of election and selection and composition of these electoral bodies, primarily the electoral commissions. And that's why I'm going back to something that's already been heard and said, and that needs to be reiterated. We cannot implement an efficient and high quality reform of electoral bodies without a unified electoral law, which should define these principles which we're discussing right now. So those are some of my impressions of the institutional fight for a better Serbia. And once again, a great thank you to all those that contributed to exchange impressions, ideas, and learned lessons from other countries in order to get out of point A.
Thank you, Pavle. During these 3 days, we've understood how much we lacked conversations and discussions and exchanges. We didn't have enough time. I apologize on behalf of the organizers because during a lot of thematic forums, we were unable to allow you to speak. Only the keynote speakers and some moderators spoke. This is actually another proof of how much we need an argumentative conversations. As a practitioner, I wanted to hear more solutions. I wanted to hear after each panel a task. I want now to be able, for instance, during this weekend or on Monday, to sit at that joint blue table and make new action plans. On the other hand, the fact that you all came here, that some of you came from far away, that some of you engaged physical effort to be here today and these 2 previous days. This gives us hope. This makes us understand that there are people who care. Very often we receive messages, okay, you've made this research now, we all know that already. But then again, months later, the only information that is quoted while talking about a certain issue is exactly that research done by us or by another civil society organization. So this conversation should not be the conversation between the 3 of us. I invite all of you to participate if you have something to tell us in these 10 or 15 minutes that are ahead of us. So you can share your impressions with us. You can comment. You can share a thought. You can perhaps say what you were incited by. What will you be doing over this weekend? What do you think that as an organization, as an accountable organization, we should do something? Please, you have the floor. The mic is there. If you have a question for Pavle, perhaps, how does he think that the voters' register can be audited? Please. Today, I'm Anna Yakovlevich, MP of the Parliamentary Party. I work together with Pavle in a working group that deals with the election reforms. I would like to thank you for this conference. It was really very important. A lot of good topics, a lot of fine speakers. We are interested in what you do as a civil society. We're unable to follow, to monitor everything within the time we have, but your work helps us a lot when we speak. At the Parliament, I have my fellow MP here with me today. We have to fight for what our citizens deserve, and they deserve to live in a democratic society where there's a freedom of choice, the rule of law. The citizens must know how worthy their votes are. They think that their votes are meaningless, but it's not so. We have to work on raising citizens' awareness. They have to know democracy is the establishment of major peoples. So we have to know it all. Thank you for this conference and thank you for the invitation, Mel.
Dobar dan svima.
Good day, I'm Zoran Alimpic. I'm here as a member of the City Electoral Commission, so I represent a small portion of the electoral administration. I would like to thank you for this conference, which was phenomenal and huge and important. I regret that some people who promised to come did not come. They have other engagements, but I hope that these panels that are not organized according to Chatham House rules can be seen on YouTube so that we can have a look back at their contents. I would like to say something about the electoral administration. I heard here today, and I heard quite a few days in these last 3 days, statements of the type professional electoral administration can enable better organized and fair elections, and so on. So I feel the urge to say something. The question is, who will elect these experts and that professional administration. So if it is elected like right now, the so-called independent bodies, just like the REM and the like, if they're elected by the parliament, by the government, this won't be either independent or professional. We will just step deeper into the mud. Let's think about that too. Thank you. Thank you for this comment.
Yesterday at a workshop, this discussion table regarding the voter registry, a colleague from the Ministry of Internal Affairs in France, when asked how long does his organizational unit exist, which deals with the updating of the voter registry in a centralized manner, he answered with a depressing answer of 150 years. I'm certain that 150 years ago, 100 years ago, maybe even 20 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, the manner in which they worked, how they communicated with citizens, how they verified their work, how they answered, were accountable for the work was not the same as theirs. Someone for years, decades has worked on the advancement of a system of voter registry. Quite often, we lack in our society, we lack self-criticism, admission of errors in many domains, not just in the domain of administration. The key problem that we realized during these few days was that, first of all, the most powerful parts of the nomenclatura in our society do not admit that we have a problem, and therefore we cannot resolve it because the problem does not exist. We are the ones creating a problem. The problem is being underlined by us. We had no one from the Ministry of Internal Affairs yesterday. Republic of Serbia, I'm sorry that you could not have a colleague from Serbia to discuss with, because impressed by the example of France, which has very creative solutions. They seem like banal things, but would resolve many things with which Serbian elections are faced. At a meeting when Pavle and I asked question members of the internal affairs of the ministry if they could be the ones updating the electoral voter registry, they just basically laughed diabolically because that's just another additional problem which nobody wants to tackle. Unfortunately, many choose to stand back. And I thank you for not be willing to stand back. And we also have activists in this room, observers of CRTA. We have representatives of the academic society, representatives of some institutions. Thank you for being here. Representatives of media houses and associations. Thank you. Thank you for not standing back. Thank you for being troublemakers. Thank you for being disruptors. I apologize for using these English terms in Serbian. And thank you for not accepting this sort of reality. And thank you for contributing with your work to say that what we're seeing is not normal, that everything that sometimes we felt on our own skin was not normal, or our own backs. I don't know how that will be translated into Russian, but I believe that in these last few days we had momentum that societies found ways how to tackle these problems in much more difficult situations, that we have yet to reach the bottom. Thank you, Vuyo, for having underlined that it can always be worse, but does not disassociate us from the obligation to basically pull up our sleeves and for discussion tables which were discontinued after the valves were open that need to be restarted immediately, and that we see associates in you and allies with which we can continue the discussion working tables in the next days and weeks, and to finally begin to fight in the streets in a much more creative way. And I do not mean anything negative, anything violent, but the fact that the director of CRTA has been trying for years uh, to get naked in front of the parliament of Serbia, and I believe that the moment has finally come. And in the constant search for creative representations of reality, how to summarize things for some donors, basically in 2 sentences, what we did. Instead of writing reports, some of them are already laughing. That's good. We have before us creative graphic representation, which will be worked on in terms of details. What are some of the conclusions, some of the thoughts, the emotions regarding these 3 days? And thank you to the team that worked on this. This all will be also be available online. Who are the authors? The question from the audience. Please present yourselves. I did not draw it, believe me. Would you like to say something traditionally as well? We did a graphic presentation. I don't know what to say next or where to go next. Michaela. Thank you, Ratra. Thank you, Pavle. Thank you, Ivana. I would ask you kindly to remain in the room because we want to use this conference as an opportunity to, within it, organize an event which is very dear to our heart, and that is the annual award of courageous voice, representing the respect towards individuals and also groups, which pushed the envelope through activism and also initiated good changes in the society. I would like to ask Vuko Savacinansky, the director of CRTA, to address us before we give the awards.
I know what everyone thinks about now. This conference, and of course, thank you for being here. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. This conference has reminded us, and quite often we have the opportunity to point to the weakening of institutions and of democracy. Nevertheless, this conference has demonstrated the opportunities to see that an important civil institution can live in the world and in Serbia and shows a great resilience. This is the institution of a citizen, female or male citizens. Svetlana, thank you very much for the sentiment you woke within me, especially with women. Hey, women, well done. We won't give up. I don't want to cry and I don't want to flash my boobs, but I will seek an opportunity to do so. And this acknowledgement, the brave voice, is awarded to the institution of the citizens of a common sense and courageousness that it supposes. Let me remind you, a responsible citizen demand from the institution and the state to work accountably within the legal framework and in the best public interest. One of the activists' tasks is to oversee the institution. The citizens' task is to protest when the institution neglects their rights. What is better than to voice the discontent? But when the violation of law is normalized and a lot of citizens, unfortunately, remain silent, even though they may be succumbed to violence. Silence for the victims and impunity for violators is not normal. The system is corrupted and we're apathic. So this is an opportunity to thank this year's winners because they do not accept the normality of what's not in the best interest of citizens. Long live freedom. Thank you, Vukom. This year, we will give one first and two special prizes. A lot of you in September remember how much bravery was needed to engage in the Citizen on Watch project. Today, we had two heroes who monitored, observed the elections. We are very proud of their first missions, Republika from Kragujevac and from Chupria, the Center for the Development of the Valley of the Morava. Other local groups should start being active in this field too. Bojana Vlahović-Savić, Maria Milošević-Nasijević, and Marko Nikolić from Republika, please come to the stage and have the awards.
A sada pozivam
And now Ivana Sokolovic and Zoran Stamenkovic from the Center for the Development of the Valley of the Morava. Please come to the stage for your awards.
Andrej Obradović je
Andrej Obradović is a young man who bravely, before the public, talk about the police brutality and homophobia that he was exposed to. He acted as a dignified citizen, knowing for sure that he had not chosen the easy path. He hasn't reached his goal yet, but his pride is a triumph, encouraging all those who fear and escape to the feeling of helplessness. Please, Andrej Obradović, could you come to the stage and give a speech as the winner of the Brave Voice Awards?
zdravo.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me. I have stage fright. I'm sorry. I would like to thank you all for this recognition, for this award. And sincerely speaking, I did not expect this. I have never acted in order to draw attention to myself. My motivation has always been and will be to draw the attention of the competent institutions. I believe that each citizen of this country, all of my friends, members of my family, can enjoy the basic human rights. I would like to remind you of something before the end, and this is that the rights we take for granted had been fought for in the past. Some people even lost their lives. So I have a question for you. Can we ask ourselves in which country we want to live and which country we want to leave to our children and to everyone else? Thank you. Thank you, Andre. Thank you, all brave voices, and thank you all who contributed to this exciting conference. We've had 3 great days, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you.
I još jedna napomena.
And another remark, you won't go home, but you will have lunch at the restaurant.